Thanks, everybody. Okay, I'm going to begin. It's time. Got a good crew today. Thanks for coming, everybody. Hello, everybody. This is Simon Rosenberg from NDN, and this is our periodic showing of our signature presentation, With Democrats, Things Get Better. I've been presenting this deck in some form or fashion over the last decade or so. This is sort of the great-great-grandchild of the original one. It was built really to challenge many of the main arguments that Donald Trump was making during the 2020 election, and it's continued to evolve since then, adding obviously a lot of data in from the first 2 years of the Biden administration. So this will take about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll be having time for Q&A going all the way up to 2 o'clock Eastern time for those of you who want to stay involved in the discussion, and appreciate you all coming today. And let's go. And so I always begin with a basic reminder about how important the last election was and how things could have been different and how incredible it has been now that we've had 2 consecutive elections of enormous consequence where Democrats have performed admirably, worked their butts off, gotten the things done we needed to get done, and been able to make sure that MAGA didn't have the degree of power and control that it wanted over the country. And so just a big thank you to everybody, and a reminder of just how important it is that we've been able to prevail in the last really 3 elections now, 3 strong consecutive elections. And hats off to Nancy Pelosi for her many, many years of leadership. Extraordinary leader for all of us, and deserves our thanks and praise for many years to come. The basic idea behind this presentation, and Doodleen, if you can just let me know that you've seen this now, is that we need a better story about America since the Cold War ended and a new age of globalization began. The story that we all tell ourselves and the media expresses to us is often, I think, not very accurate about what's happened. It's often framed in this idea that there's a left and a right in this country, and that they're in this sort of perpetual thank you, Doodleen, in a perpetual struggle for power, with each party, each side being sort of equally virtuous and equally full of vice. And I think that basic formula, the symmetry between left and right, is one of the biggest sort of misconceptions in our politics today. I mean, for those of you who just followed my red wave analysis, it's a little red wavy, right? It's not true, and it's a little bit of a fiction and a myth. And it's something that we have to work very hard, I think, in the coming months and years to change that story and that understanding. Because really what the real story has been is one party that's done a lot of good and another party that hasn't. And that we've continually made the country better when we've been in power and they repeatedly haven't. And that there's a difference, there's a vast difference between the 2 parties. There's very little actually that's the same. And we have to reject this basic kind of false and facile and lazy symmetry that often really dominates the political discourse in the media. And so our story really does begin in 1989. We forget sometimes just about how there really was a before and after in human history. The Cold War ended, the communism collapsed, the Berlin Wall fell, and a whole new age began where we were really all in one single global system as compared to 3 different global systems prior to 1989. And it's been my belief that we haven't really come to terms with the enormity of the changes that have taken place for the United States and the world. And this is just my list of things that have happened during this period. It's been a time of extraordinary transformation and change, particularly around this idea of a single global media, which is so much important part of our current discourse here in the United States. But this has been a time of enormous change and transformation. The country's changed, the world has changed. And I think one of the ways that you often evaluate leaders or institutions or organizations, or all of you work for enterprises that are constantly managing against change. And I think one of the most useful ways to look at American politics since 1989 is how have the 2 parties themselves managed against change? And let's take a look. So on the basic measure of jobs created, you can see that Democrats have repeatedly created a lot of jobs and Republicans haven't. This has got to be the sort of basic measure and evaluation of the performance of the two parties during this period. I began this presentation prior to Biden, during the Trump era, even prior to COVID. And so Trump's numbers were even a little bit better back then. But you can see that we now have a consistent pattern over time during this period since 1989 of strong performance under Democratic presidents and anemic or poor performances under Republicans. When I began this presentation, I started with this slide, which is that during the 16 years of Clinton and Obama, 34 million jobs were created. Under the 16 years of the two Bushes and Trump, there were only 2 million jobs created. And that this, I often joke that I could just stop the presentation right here, right? That this would be enough. What else did you need to know, right? But we are, I'm not going to be answering any questions, folks, to the end, right? So please hold it to the end. I know people are jumping in here, but let me get through the presentation and then we can have a conversation. And so 17 times as many jobs are created under these 16 years of the previous two Democratic presidents compared to the Republican presidents. And this is really a very stark contrast. And it's one that I think we have to do much more to help people understand. And when you look at what's happened under Biden, and there's been incredible bitching and moaning from Republicans about the Biden economic performance, Republicans during these 16 years averaged 10,000 jobs a month was created over the 16-year period. Under Biden, it's been almost 50 times that. And even just this last month, where things have slowed down a little bit, 260,000 jobs per month, which was a good month during this period. That's 26 times a normal month of a Republican president. And so we're really talking about almost, apples and oranges here, right? These aren't even apples and apples. I mean, it's incredible how strong the job growth has been under Biden and how anemic it was repeatedly under Republican presidents. And when you look at it and break it out this way, right now we see that, Biden, there's been more than 5 times as many jobs created under Biden's just 2 years than were created under these 16 years of the last 3 Republican presidents. And when you add it all up, since 1989, there have been 46 million net new jobs created in America. 44 million of those have been created under Democratic presidents, basically all of them. And this contrast, again, I just want to reiterate that it is incumbent upon us to explain to the American people about this. This isn't just a partisan thing. People need to be aware of what's happened in their own country during their lifetime and what's happened when the two parties have been in power. We've had one party that's repeatedly done a good job and another party that's repeatedly let the country down. And if you look at GDP growth, which is one of the Republican favorite measures of economic progress, the GDP growth under Biden has been 3.5 times it was under Trump, and certainly still outpacing recent Republican presidents. And the unemployment rate, I'm going to go through now this data a little bit quickly because it all tells the same story. Unemployment rate rose under Republican presidents, dropped under Democratic presidents. And one of my favorite statistics of the Biden era has been this one, which is this is new business formation. We're seeing an explosion of entrepreneurship and new businesses being created in recent years. It's continued after COVID has receded, this sort of pace of new business formation. This is very exciting, obviously, because it's a sign of incredible health and vitality of this political moment that we're in. And even though inflation's been too high, wages have grown at an historically high rate. And so people have, many people are actually ahead of where they were 2 years ago. Not everyone has fallen behind. It's been uneven. If you've lived in rural areas, the impact of inflation because of gas prices has been much worse than it's been if you don't drive as much and if you have more fuel efficient cars. So many, many families have actually come out ahead during this period and have not fallen behind. And what's also important about this period since 1989 is that we've seen an explosion of wealth creation in the United States, arguably the biggest period of wealth creation in all of our history. All the measures, the various ways we measure stock wealth, they are through the roof. And if you look here, this is the Dow. In 1989, when Bush became president, the Dow was at 2,000. The Dow is now 17 times that over this period. What it meant was that American companies we're really well positioned to take advantage of a customer base that went from 1.5 billion to 2 billion people to 7 billion people. Our global companies have been wildly successful. Their values have been bid up in a global marketplace, and we've seen an explosion of wealth. This is a sign of incredible success of the United States. And if you notice, most of the gains that have happened under Democratic presidents. So we've not only had job creation and all the things we saw earlier, but wealth, the enormous wealth that's been created in America has happened largely under Democratic presidents. And this is a sign. I feel that Biden, you're going to see, strong stock market performance, I hope, over the next couple of years to put his number up a little bit higher. This has obviously been a very choppy economic period for the country. We've weathered it pretty well, particularly compared to other nations. And so, this is another sign of the success of Democrats, right? So all these things Republicans claim that they do, it's actually things that we do, right? We're the ones that create growth and opportunity for the United States. We also are the party of fiscal responsibility. This is another incredible red wavy kind of myth that exists in our politics, which is this is the increase of the deficit during the course of the presidencies over the last 6 presidents. Under Republicans, that they went up, and under Democrats, they went way down. Clinton even got us to surplus before he left office. So this is another kind of myth buster here that the Republicans have been the party of fiscal responsibility. We've seen growth, opportunity, lower deficits. They've seen recessions and spiraling deficits on their watch. And it's important to recognize is that in 2022, the deficit was actually lower than it was when Trump in pre-COVID in 2019, right? And so this is how much progress we've made on the deficit in such a short period of time. And I think it's hard to really understand the scale of Trump's profligacy. He was the most fiscally reckless president in the modern era. This is the percentage of deficit as percentage of GDP. And you can see that the only time that's even remotely close to this of what during the recent Trump deficit was during World War II. But during this entire post-World War period, there was never a period remotely close to where Trump took the deficit under his watch. And it's not a big surprise. Why would any of us really been big surprised that he was good at spending other people's money for his own benefit, right? And so, he was the most fiscally reckless president of the modern era. The Republicans have repeatedly done a terrible job at managing our fiscal house, so to speak. And again, as a sign, the deficit went up, even though the economy was growing, right? The deficit went up because of the Republican tax plans. They went up every year under Trump. They've come down every year under Biden. And on the thing that Democrats care the most about, which is not just all this wealth that's been created in the jobs, but the distribution of the wealth that we have in America, you see another story here. You often hear commentators talk about how incomes and wages have been flat for 20 years or 30 years or 40 years. I mean, that's just not true, right? This is something that is a myth in our politics. Incomes went way up when we were in power. They flatlined or went down under the two Bushes. They actually went down during their presidencies. They did go up under Trump, right? It dropped when COVID happened. But we've seen, incomes under Democratic presidents go up. People haven't fallen behind. People are not worse off today than they were in 1989. They're better off today. It's not by as much as what's happened in the stock market, right? We can't be satisfied with this because the market, if you're in the market, right, you're 17 times ahead of where you were in 1989. Workers aren't 17 times ahead of where they were in 1989. We're not far enough, but we haven't fallen behind. And this is really, really important. I think there's a lot of misperception in the public discourse about what's happened with the American economy. It's that we've done really well as a country. It's just not enough people are keeping up. It's not that they're falling behind. And this is really important. And I hope that in the coming years, because of the investments we've made, far more people are going to be better off in the coming years because of the far-sighted investments of the Democrats in the last 2 years. I want to spend a couple minutes just talking a little bit about the Great Recession and the public response to the Great Recession, because I think when we try to figure out what happened with Trump and the kind of shock to the system that could have created something like Trump, I think we overlook the impact of the Great Recession too much. I think it's far more central to our current understanding of our journey than it is often in our discourse. And this is a sign here of how much wealth dropped under the Great Recession. You see that during this period from the early 80s up until the Great Recession, that people's income wealth had almost doubled. Their collective wealth had almost doubled as a family, median wealth, and then it plummeted. This kind of thing is the kind of thing that can create a shock like Trump. I mean, this was a shock to the system. If you were an older worker, you were aware that you were never going to recover the kind of wealth that you had just lost during this period. And this was just an extraordinary shock to the American economy. Have regular old families who had worked so hard to accumulate so much wealth, often in their homes, lost so much ground so rapidly. And I think we need to talk about this more. And what's also important, and this is median wealth by quintile, right, by the highest and the lowest. Under Democratic president here, under Clinton, you can see that people at the bottom went up, right? Because of our economic policies, which are geared to the forgotten middle class. And then we saw the beginning of the plutocratic Bush tax cuts, where you saw wealthy people now get, much further ahead. And then this is what happened with wealth during this period under Obama and the Great Recession, which is the people at the bottom end took the biggest hit. People at the top actually got ahead during this period, but people at the bottom really suffered. And so when Trump became president, you had this economic reality where people at the bottom had suffered tremendously loss of wealth. People at the top had done all right after having had a period of strong period of gains, right? So what would be your response to this if you were a responsible leader? You would obviously focus your economic strategy on the people that had just lost so much. And the Republicans did the exact opposite of that, right? It's really important to recognize that in 2017, the tax plan gave virtually all of the benefits to the people at the upper end, the people who had needed it the least, and gave virtually nothing to the people at the bottom, starving the people at the bottom that had just suffered so much. The lighter gray chart here is the distribution of the American Rescue Plan. And you can see that Biden did the responsible thing, right? The moral thing by responding to the struggle of people who had lost so much with focusing our economic strategy towards them. And I'm really proud of this. I mean, this to me is one of the most important slides in this whole deck, because it shows the moral bankruptcy of the modern Republican Party that seems focused really only on one thing, which is lessening the tax burden of people that don't need it. And it's the Democrats who've repeatedly been there for working people in their economic lives and their economic struggles now over a long period of time. It's really important to recognize the overall progress that has been made during this period. In the last few months, we've seen the lowest unemployment rate, the lowest uninsured rate, the lowest poverty rate in American history. We've seen these booming stock markets. High school graduation rates now are at an all-time high. Minority college attainment is at an all-time high in the United States. Enormous signs of progress. The crime rate, despite a recent rise in the murder rate, but not the crime rate, we've seen a crime rate is now half of what it was during the 1980s and 1990s. Crime rates of immigrant workers continue to be far below the crime rates of native-born. And there was a period where we had the border under control. We can talk about that a little bit. I want to emphasize this, which is that we're now living in a period of the lowest uninsured rate in American history. This was not an accident. A meteor didn't hit the earth, right? This was due to far-sighted policy by the Democrats in both the Obama and the Biden administrations. I'm very proud of this, and we should all be very proud of this. The impact on the lives of these people, right, is just unbelievable what it means for folks to have the financial and certainty of being able to know that if you get sick, you can take care of your family, to know that if you want to leave a job, that there'll be health insurance on the other end. For those of us who are older, right, we know we lived in America where people didn't leave their jobs because they were concerned about losing their health insurance. And so, this is an extraordinary achievement by the Democrats. And Ron, I just want to reiterate, I'm not going to be answering any questions until the very end. I want to get through the whole presentation. I also want to just raise for a minute this issue about the open borders thing that we hear so much about, that under the Obama and Biden administration, there was actually a decline in the undocumented immigrants in the United States. There wasn't any open borders. Democrats have never been for open borders. This is a red wavy kind of narrative coming from the right. And what this means is that, when we had a period, and we'll talk about what's happening now on the border in a minute, but when this assertion that Democrats have always been for open borders, in fact, when we were our last administration was in power, We saw a decline in the undocumented population in the United States over their time in office. It was an important achievement to show that we could get control over the border. And so what I want to just reiterate to everybody here is that the central argument that Trump made during his candidacy and his presidency was that letting all these people into the country has made America worse, that we've become something less than what we were. And yet what I just showed you is that by virtually every measure, right? Economic growth, stock market, job creation, uninsured rate, unemployment rate, crime rates, everything else, we're better off today than we were 25, 30 years ago. And I think it's the exact opposite of what Trump says. We're not worse off because of all those people coming into the country. America's probably never been stronger and better than it is today. And that we are a period where more people have more opportunity than they've ever had in the history of the country. And I'm very proud because it's really been our party that's fostered this kind of environment where so many people, differing gender diversity, racial diversity, ethnic diversity, immigrants are thriving in a multiracial democracy in a complicated economy. This is an amazing achievement, and we should be very proud of it. It's the exact opposite of what Trump said. I think America's never been stronger and better than it is today. And by all the measures, and I'm going to update this over the next few presentations because the data is basically still the same, is that people basically understand. And I just looked at the exit polls, for example, and on the question of are immigrants better for the country or making it worse, it's like a 15-point gap. It's not as high as this, but it's still very, very high. People understand that immigrants bring vitality and energy and entrepreneurship to the country, which of course is true. And on the question around global trade, it's really the Republican Party that's become the protectionist, xenophobic party, right? Our party continues to be open to diversity, open to immigration, open to globalization, and an open-minded, global, and fair-minded party. I'm very proud of that, to be part of that party. We've not only been successful at governing during this period, and I am running a little bit long, and I'm going to cruise through this section quickly, but we've also been very successful at politics. When I worked in the Clinton campaign in 1992, we had lost 5 out of the 6 previous presidential elections, some of them by historic margins. And since then, when we began a different kind of politics for the Democratic Party, we've won more votes in 7 out of 8 elections. That's the best popular vote run of an American party in all of American history. This has been a period of enormous success for Democrats as a political entity, not just as a governing entity. And you can see this is the Pew data, the Gallup data showing party ID. During most of this period since 1989, the country has felt more Democratic than Republican. People viewed themselves as more democratic. And I think that part of the argument I make is that if everything I just said is true, that basically since 1989, we've done a better job than they have, it should show up in how young people who came of age during this period, view the two parties, right? They should see the two parties as different. And they do. I mean, young people today, people under 45, are much more democratic than they used to be. Young people used to be a swing vote in America. It was a jump ball vote in the Clinton era and the Bush era. And now there's been a big structural change. We won based on the exits under 45-year-old voters by 13 points in 2022, which has been about the average, in this age. It's a number that we have to maintain because all of our margins in these elections come from how well we do with younger people. Among under 33-year-old voters, we saw really strong performance in this election in 18 to 29-year-olds at the upper end of our performance. I haven't updated the slides yet, obviously, because I'm still kicking around with the data, but we saw very strong performance with 18 to 29-year-olds. And in fact, I just realized that I had slightly different number here, is that I've got it at plus 33, but this is the breakdown in 3 of the last 4 elections, the various ages. And you see that over 45-year-old voters, we lose, and we gain our big margins with under 45-year-old voters. We've got to keep this in mind. Young people have to be at the very center of our politics going forward, not at the periphery. This is another reason why, is that these generations are going to be increasingly a bigger and bigger slice of the American electorate over time. We've got to maintain our strong margins with young people. I want to just talk for a minute about a concern I have, which is that despite all of this economic data that I just marshaled for you, we are not doing well in the perception of who's good for the economy. This is the 2020 election. On the top issue, Trump beat us 4-1 among voters who said the economy was most important for them. And in that 2020 election, on the simple question, who's better able to handle the economy, Trump beat Biden by 12 points. Biden went into his presidency in an economic deficit, and he's never really been able to get out of it despite his very strong economic performance. And I can show you all sorts of polling data that shows that even from the very beginning, this is June of 2021, there was a really big perception difference between his performance on healthcare and the pandemic and on the economy, right? We were running just barely ahead of the Republicans on the economy, even though the economy at this point was booming. And so this was sort of this depressed understanding of Biden's performance on the economy. And then this continued. You see here that, this is November of 2021. We're now in a deficit on the economy in Navigator polling, right? Even though the economy is booming during this period and lots of jobs are being created and we're coming out of the Trump recession that we were in, we're still in a negative place on the economy despite all of that. And then these continued. I mean, this is February of 2022. He's down, we're down 16 points on the economy, even though we're even on the pandemic. And so there's become a big structural problem for us in people's understanding about our relationship to the economy, particularly given all this data that I just showed you. I mean, we shouldn't be trailing the Republicans on the economy, period, over and out. We've been far better over now 3 consecutive administrations. We need to figure this out. To me, this is one of the biggest opportunities and that we have as a party is to figure out how to win the economic argument with the Republicans. And I'm going to skip through this. And the point is that there's data there to show that we can. My view is that Biden will be extolling the virtues of the big investments we've made. We'll have an opportunity over the next 2 years to draw even with the Republicans on this. This is a huge priority. We can't have the kind of election victories that we want if we're trailing the Republicans on the economy, particularly when they've been so bad repeatedly, 3 consecutive recessions, spiraling deficits. This is a huge party-wide project. So let me make some final observations here about all this. My thrust in this in beginning was trying to push back against this left-right formulation of our politics, this notion that somehow in this vast and complicated country, the two parties could end up just being mirror images of one another. On the face of it, it's an absurdity. And to me, for those of you who've gotten to know the way I push back against the red wave, I want to push back with something of equal force and hopefully success on this kind of left-right, the simplistic left-right formulation. I think this is really critical because I think it's distorting. I think it's a Republican talking point. They want people to believe that our two parties are the same and just mirror images of one another when we're not. We've been a good party and they haven't. And we have to maintain that contrast as we go forward. It's essential. It's also being truthful to the American people, by the way, in addition to being partisan from a partisan standpoint, beneficial. It's my view now that the big project ahead of us is to preserve this liberal order that we talked about earlier, that we're in a period now where the world has suffered a collective trauma and that we need to come out of this not only strong here in the United States, which I think we are, but to come out strong all across the world and to make sure this world of opportunity and openness that our party built after World War II continues for our kids and our grandkids. We're being called again as Democrats in the way that we were called before to make sure that the world of Pax Americana, the world of openness and opportunity, prevails in the struggle between authoritarianism and democracy. And I always, whenever I give a big presentation, I try to remind Democrats about this, the speech that FDR gave in 1941 that really laid out in such simple ways the realities of the modern world, the world that our party helped create and is fighting to maintain and preserve and modernize and improve every day, these 4 simple hopes and aspirations for the world, all around the concept of freedom. I think Democrats are getting reacquainted with freedom now in a very powerful way, but it is really our orienting value and attribute. This is what we wanted back in 1941. We didn't want a world of authoritarianism and totalitarianism, a lack of freedom. We wanted a world full of freedom. And this is the world that we're fighting for once again. And I think we have to remember just how extraordinary it is during this time. And we've seen a vast decline in global poverty because of the global system that the United States has imagined and built. I mean, I would argue that no group of people in all human history have created a system that's been more full of opportunity for the people of the world than the world that the Democratic Party created in the 1940s. And you also see it in another measure, which is life expectancy. I mean, there's never been a better time to be alive in human history than it is now. The world that we live in today is more full of hope and possibilities and opportunity than it's ever been. And our party did that, right? We helped create and foster this world, which is why the battle that we're seeing with Ukraine and against authoritarians all around the world is so deeply consequential now for us as Democrats, one that is familiar to us as a party. And I think it's important to not only go back to 1989 to understand the greatness of what the Democratic Party has been, but also to go back even further. I mean, the achievements of our party, over the last 100 years has been extraordinary. And it's something that we have to be inspired by to go do the work that we do, the battles that we're in every day to prevent MAGA from taking over the government in the United States and all across the world. And I think that when I look at this, this always inspires me. This is why I get up every day doing what I do. You may have your own list. Please do up your own list. Draw your own list of the reasons that you're proud to be a Democrat and proud of your leaders and proud of this incredible thing called the Democratic Party. We've been a force of remarkable good now for a long, long period of time. And I used to not have this slide in this presentation. I used to describe the Republicans as just not having done their part, right? I was perhaps generous in the way that I characterized the Republican Party since 1989, but I think we now have to recognize that malevolence has crept in to the modern Republican Party and MAGA. This is not just a party that's failing to do their part. It's a party that's actually become in many ways a malevolent force in the life of this country and even in other parts of the world. And we have to be honest and forthright about that. I actually think this was a major part of the conversation in this last election. I think many of the very MAGA candidates lost, even in Republican-leaning places. And so there is a sense that people have a fear of MAGA. They understand that MAGA is extreme and dangerous. And it's something that we have to keep front of mind, regardless of how uncomfortable it may be, because it's also just true. And we have an obligation to tell the truth to the American people. And so when you wonder and you hear people talk about what's gone wrong with America, as opposed to what's gone right, I'm a glass half full kind of guy. I want to just remind you, right, that over this period of time, our party has done its part, right? It's not the two parties that are screwed up or politics in Washington. That's not what's gone wrong, right? Washington isn't broken, our politics isn't broken. The Republican Party has become broken. And this is the central challenge of our time, which is how to to end the grip of MAGA over the Republican Party, to hopefully return it to something that feels more like a traditional center-right party. Because if you need any reminder, right, about who they are and what they've become, right, just familiarize and go back and look at some of these images from before and what happened just 2 years ago. A party that hasn't really yet renounced this kind of extraordinary event that took place in 2021. And so we have to be inspired by not only the good works of our party over these years, but also to be inspired by what could happen if they have too much power again before they've reformed and moved on from MAGA. The stakes are very high. I appreciate being in the battle with all of you. I'm proud to be a Democrat. I'm proud of my party. I think we need to learn how to be more loud and proud of our achievements and to be less living in the darkness. There was far too much internal discord and anger in this last election. We don't have the luxury of that any longer. The battles that are in front of us are as important as the ones that are behind us. And I'm confident that together we can continue to do the right thing for the American people and prevail. Thanks everybody very much. Happy to take your questions. This was a long one today. I had some new stuff that I was trying out, but I appreciate it. Let me pause share here and come and join all of you here. And I know that there are lots of questions. Let me first go to I'm going to go, I don't answer anonymous questions, by the way, just as a matter of course. If you want to come into the conversation, just let us know who you are. Kathleen raises that we need to have better sourcing on the slides. I don't disagree with that. We actually do that now and when I post this on Twitter, I do a version of this on Twitter. And we will make those changes going forward. All of this is government data, and I know that we need to do it politically, but because of just the doubters on the internet. But there isn't an alternative set of data to this. This is just basic government data from BLS and other places. The recording will be on the internet this afternoon, and I'm going to try to answer questions that I feel are being asked in good faith, by the way. And skip the ones that aren't. Let me see. Dale asked a question, which is, have people seen this in charge of democratic messaging? Yeah, they've seen it. But I also, what I'd like to say to all of you is that what I want to challenge everyone to do here today is to learn all of this. This will be on the internet. There are versions of it on my website with the charts and graphs, and we need to do our part here. I mean, the Republicans are louder than we are. We need to learn how to be louder and to be in this information war and to make a contribution. And we all have our part to play. And whether that's through postcard writing or door knocking or phone calls that you make or emailing your friends, you don't want to spam people and be a pain in the ass, right? But you want to show up here, and you're showing up here for your country. And there is no question that the American people deserve to have the understanding that I expressed here today, because I do think this story is an affirmative one. It shows that with smart policies, we can make things better for ourselves and for the world. And people need to hear that right now. I think that there's been a lot of negative sentiment in our politics in recent years. And I think that part of the role that I've tried to play this year is I've tried to provide more positive sentiment, to give people hope, and to believe in their country and their leaders in America and our democracy. This is such a remarkable country. I feel so blessed to be here every day, that we need to spend more time living in the positive than we do in the negative. I think these negative sentiment, as I described earlier, that crept into our discourse as Democrats was self-indulgent. We just don't really have that. I mean, yeah, there are going to be internal disagreements in our party. That's to be expected. We're a big, complicated, diverse party, but we can disagree without being disagreeable. We can't let our disagreements become fights, and we need to do a better job about that. Seth has a question. Totally agree with your analysis, Simon. Question: I didn't hear much mention the freedom agenda in your list of key Dem successes and failures. That yeah, I did get that to the end a little bit, Seth. I am going to work on that a little bit more, and I agree with your basic idea here, and I did tie that together at the end. It's perhaps not as explicit in slides. I mean, I did talk about the 4 freedoms, which is really, if any of you haven't read that speech recently, I would encourage you to read it. You can also listen to it if you can. It's the most important political speech ever given in American English, in my view. It is the foundation of the modern world that we all live in. And because FDR was a brilliant leader, he was able to summarize it down into such simple principles, which became the 4 guiding principles of the United Nations and really are the foundation of the modern world. And it's something that is, if you haven't spent time with it recently, there's many ways to engage with it. Either reading the text of the speech, listening to FDR's delivery, reading books about it, but it's the foundational speech of the modern world. It's the foundational speech of the modern Democratic Party. It's the most important speech ever given, in my view, by a Democrat. And it's something that if you haven't lived with and spent time with recently, I just encourage you to do. Yeah, look, I think there are many questions in here, and Ron, I'll get to you in a second, is that there are many questions in here about how come this isn't better known. Well, help me, right? And send my presentation, the recording, to all of your friends. I mean, I do this once a month. Bring everybody you've ever met to the next one. We can handle. We had hundreds of people on today. Let's have way more hundreds next time, right? Every time I do this, it's updated and new, and the data is fresh. There are a few things I realized today that I need to clean up a little bit. I got to shorten it a little bit. It was a little long today. I do think 25 minutes is kind of the most that people can really sit through without getting too fidgety. But I'm going to work very hard, particularly now, given the recognition that I've gotten, frankly, through many of you because of our election analysis, that I'm reaching many more people than I used to. And I want to make sure that they not only understand that we produce election analysis and we call the election properly, but that we have all this other work that we do here as well that I think people will find of interest. I do believe, if I can sort of project forward, because there are questions in here about 2024, I do believe that Joe Biden has two big governing and message opportunities. We have to win the war against Russia in Ukraine and keep the world peaceful and prosperous, to make sure authoritarians don't continue to march here and around the world. But we also have to use this opportunity of the implementation of the infrastructure bill, the climate bill, and the CHIPS bill to use it to connect people back to this data, to remind people that, we're the ones fighting for them. I think we're going to have a real opportunity to do that. I think all of you will have the opportunity to do that in your communities as these three bills begin to get funded and the money begins to move out the door, and that we start to see the fruits of our investments, which will be taking place not just over the next 2 years, but over the 20 years ahead. So on the other question that people keep asking, which is how to access this, there's a lot of information on my website at ndn.org. I do tweet about this quite a bit. I am trying to figure out what to do about Twitter. I haven't made any big decisions yet, but certainly Twitter probably will be less of a major force in our future than it was in our past. And then this is available on YouTube. I mean, anybody can watch this. You can share this with anybody that you want. And I would love it if you showed it to friends and to get their feedback. And this should be up on the afternoon. I don't release the deck. The deck is not released, but the presentation is released. And some of the slides are available on my site, but not the whole deck. As you can imagine, a lot went into producing this deck over a long period of time, and I'm not just giving it away. Let me go to you, Ron, and see if you have a question. Let me bring you in, Ron. If you unmute yourself, Ron, you can jump in.
Hi.
Hey.
Yeah, I think I had the question answered, but it seems to me that all the data that you provided should be in a consolidated form and a repeated advertising PR situation over a period of time to educate the public on an ongoing basis. And I don't see that happening currently.
Yeah, I know. And let me just address that, because it's many of you have asked a version of that question. Thanks for coming by, Ron. And what I will say is that if you watch Joe Biden speak about the economy, there's usually a graph next to him, which is the jobs created per month over the last 6 presidents. That slide, that graph came from this work, right? The White House is incorporating this stuff into the core of their explanation for what Joe Biden's doing. The jobs per month was something we created, because that's not traditionally a measure, it's jobs per year, and we created that, and the White House uses. Ron Klain tweets when I do my monthly jobs report, which has a bunch of these slides in it. Ron often tweets these out. Brian Deese and I are in the NEC head are in contact. They've incorporated some of these slides into their core presentation. It doesn't say NDN on the bottom, but that's fine, right? That's okay. I'd rather it say the White House on it than NDN. And the DNC also uses some of these graphs in their work. So this stuff is in now the core narrative of the story. But my story that I'm telling is perhaps different than the story that Joe Biden's going to tell. Joe Biden has to tell the story of his presidency. That's his job, and he needs to do that. I have a different job. I'm telling the story of the Democratic Party over this time. And I am going to be meeting with Jamie Harrison in the next couple of days. Jamie is aware of this work. He's a good friend. And, I'm hopeful that, we can do more to promote this work in the coming years. It's really important. I think it's really important that Democrats feel better about who we are, what we've done, about our project, our work together, about our country, about each other, all these things. And I have this theory that I'm going to be talking about a lot more in my public commentary, that for us to prevail over authoritarianism, which is really the great battle of our time, that we have to get more intentional about creating positive sentiment. I think that part of what MAGA does, what Trump does, what Russia does, what Saudi Arabia does, what those who are have a different understanding of how society should be organized, they dump a lot of negative sentiment into the United States through social media and through their engagement. They want us to feel less good about America, about our leaders, about our institutions, about our parties, about each other, about everything. They just want us to feel less good about all of this, about the American project. And I'm not willing to accept that. And I think that we, as those of us in the center left in particular, we are always at our best when we're optimistic about tomorrow and working to bring it about. And we have to become, I think, far more intentional about getting louder and being positive. And I don't think we have the luxury of the kind of negative sentiment that we felt towards one another in the last 12 months. We can be frustrated with each other. We can work hard to do the right thing. But the level of kind of animosity and toxicity that existed inside the Democratic Party in the last 12 months was the worst that I've ever experienced in my 30 years doing this. That's how we're going to lose. We're going to lose by embracing some form of their pessimism and anger. We have to reject it. I mean, I'm a Clinton Democrat, and Clinton always believed that we were at our best in the center left when we were optimists. I believe that deeply. It's one of the reasons that those of you who followed me on Twitter in the last 6 months and saw me banging out my threads every day, this was hope. It wasn't hopium, right? It was optimism. And there's a big difference in between being hopeful and being optimistic. So I do think we need to have a big conversation as Democrats about why it is that we don't feel as proud of the Democratic Party as I do, why we don't actually understand all of this stuff. Why haven't we been able to get to a place where we recognize that we are part of probably the party that's done more good for more people than any other organized political entity in all of human history? These are things that we need to learn together. And all of you have a role to play in this. All of you can amplify this work, can sell it to your friends, can bring it to others. I'm happy to even do versions of this for, large gatherings. It can't be 20 people, but if it's much bigger, I'm happy to do it and to engage people. Now that the election's over and my election commentary is, not going to be as central to my work, I want this work to become what I spend the next 6 months really engaging people on and really trying to help them lift their gaze and understand, how successful we've been and what a good and a remarkable entity we are as Democrats and how lucky we are to be part of this, to use it to inspire us to go make sure we continue to win these elections that we need to win to prevent MAGA from seizing power in the United States. And so, I'm really proud to be on this journey with all of you. I think that we have more agency as citizens than we all realize sometimes. And so my challenge to you is to make this spreading this good word as part of your good works and in the coming months. And I will continue to do my part. I haven't really been promoting all of this as much as I was because the election took over. I'm going to be now, and I'm open to ideas. I mean, you'll get an email where you can email me at the end of this that comes to me, right? And I'm happy to hear from you with suggestions and recommendations about how we can do better here and getting this word out. And I'd like to hear from all of you about that. Dale asked a question. I want to just speak, since some of you have come to know me through the work I did around the fight with the red wave. The fight over the red wave was a really foundational battle because it is about how I think the right has become so much louder than we are, not more virtuous than we are, but louder, and that they really can bully the national discourse into places that are, beneficial to them and not to us. And I think that, for example, people don't know all of this information. They were told that inflation was going to prevent us from being able to win the election, even though 2/3 of voters believed that Joe Biden wasn't responsible for inflation. We were told that, women's right to choose wasn't going to be a major issue in the election, when of course it was a thing that helped drive the election. We were told that the red wave had come and that the energy was on the Republican side, when in fact it was on the Democratic side. I mean, look, we are in a place. I'm a former TV news producer and writer. I worked for ABC News. We are in a place where we are in an a dark information place in the United States right now. And I think false memes and false things are finding their way into our national discourse through Republicans just jumping up and down and waving their arms up in the air, and then the media covering the fact that they're jumping up and down and waving their arms in the air. And that becomes a national story. I mean, what better example of that is in the fentanyl stuff that happened in the Halloween candy. I mean, it was really like a collective insanity on the Republican side that became something that we even know about and could even talk about, that this became something injected into the national discourse, that Ronna Romney McDaniel was on her Twitter feed every day talking about fentanyl and Halloween candy and Democrats trying to poison children. It was just unbelievable, right? And we, the media, part of what I'm doing now as part of my debunking the red wave is that I'm challenging those commentators and those news organizations that fell for the red wave to go through sort of a self-examination about how they could have been so bamboozled about what happened in the election. Because the red wave wasn't a miss. The red wave was the opposite of what happened, right? It wasn't just like a little miss, I got it a little bit wrong. It was the opposite of what happened. We were the energized party. They were the party that struggled to vote in the key battlegrounds, in the key states, right? We're the ones who overperformed. They're the ones that underperformed. We're the ones that had energy. They were the ones that didn't. So it wasn't a little bit of a miss. It was the worst political journalism failure in our lifetime, I would argue. And it's not, as you were discussing today, it's not unique to the red wave, right? I mean, the fact that, the story that I just told you is not better known, or that the two parties have had a very different journeys, and that we accept this kind of facile left-right, formulation in our politics, we have to challenge that. And just in the way that I challenge the red wave, I'm going to be challenging this kind of left-right symmetry that I think is a poison and is distortive and is preventing the American people from really understanding their own history. And so there's an obligation we all have to tell this story. The American people deserve to know what happened in their country. They deserve to have the truth and not to have, the equivalent of daily red wavy stuff flowing all over them that we then have to spend months and years debunking. And so, we have a lot of work to do. And I think that my hope is that we all learn from this. We become far more intentional. And here's my challenge to all of you. When you engage on social media, when you engage with your friends, try to create a much higher percentage of those engagements that are positive and that are contributing positive sentiment and positive information, rather than reinforcing negative sentiment and negative information. It doesn't mean that we don't talk about them. It doesn't mean that. I'm just talking about the ratio of your engagement, right? I'm very consciously trying to spend as little time as possible putting negative sentiment into our discourse. This is a conscious thing. I can't help myself. And this weekend, I went after Saudi Arabia and Elon, and I was attacked more on Twitter this weekend on a Saturday afternoon, a Saturday evening, than any day that I've been on Twitter in 13 years. It's a bad sign of where this is all going. But I also kicked myself because I attacked and I was negative. And it doesn't mean we can't do that. I'm not saying disarm. I'm just saying that we have to win. The way any argument works, you've got to make your case first. You got to go on offense first, and then you got to defend. And in the war room in 1992, it wasn't about rapid response. It was about winning the information war every day. And then as part of that, responding more effectively when attacked, recognizing that attacks that are not rebutted stick. But it was about winning the information war. It was about going on offense. The economy stupid wasn't defensive. It was offensive, right? That we had to win the economic argument every day, right? And I think we are not intentional enough and don't have the tools right now, the adequate number of tools to go win this argument every day with the right. I just want to conclude by saying that part of what is making me optimistic about this is that I think there's been enormous innovation in the information arena on the Democratic side in recent years, with the growth of organizations like the Midas Touch, and Courier Newsroom and Deep State Radio, and a new group that Joe Trippi has started called Resolute Square, and also groups like Indivisible and Swing Left. There's been a huge amount of entrepreneurship inside the Democratic center left and the Democratic family, trying to fill this void, trying to make us more effective communicators, trying to make sure we're going on offense every day and not ceding the information environment to them. And I'm going to be talking about that all much more during my journey over the last few months of being with all of you and fighting out the red wave battle. I did a lot of podcasts. I spoke to a lot of groups. I learned, I kind of dove into this new post-COVID kind of organization in the center left. And it's very encouraging. I'm really optimistic about what I'm seeing. I think we're seeing proud patriots and entrepreneurs going out and filling space. And so it's good, folks. Like we did good in this election. We did good in the last election. We did good in 2018. And we have to keep doing good. And we have to keep working hard, because we've done right for the country, and we have to have more faith in ourselves and go fight with more intensity and optimism and hope and confidence that what we're doing and what we're saying is going to be beneficial to the American people. And that's part of what I'm going to try to do with your help. So thanks everybody very much. I appreciate your time today. Keep the faith. Have a terrific weekend. This will be on the site sometime this afternoon, if not tomorrow. And go Raphael Warnock, right? Things look good there. Let's fingers crossed to get us to 51 in the Senate. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.